Hey, how's it going out there, my Facebook family? All my legacy leaders out there, wanted to welcome you all, say good evening, welcome you all to the Legacy Leadership Podcast, where we're changing the world one legacy at a time. I'm your host, Robert Heath Sr., CEO of Legacy Leadership Consulting and the founder of the Legacy Empowerment Academy. And for those of you all who are new to the podcast or not aware, one of the reasons why we created this podcast is because our vision at Legacy Leadership Consulting is to really change the world of leadership, to give a place where people can get together, where we can gather together to learn about ourselves, learn about how to manifest the greatness that is within us, and also how to learn how to facilitate the manifestation of greatness within others. And by doing so, by learning these skills, we'll be able to change the world one legacy at a time. All right, so tonight we're going to be doing what's called a solo cast. How you doing, Brittany? Thanks for tuning in. We're going to be doing what's called a solo cast. I'm going to be talking to you today, and we're going to be talking about leadership journey, specifically my leadership journey. But before we get into that, hey, Luis, how you doing? Thanks for tuning in. Before we get into my leadership journey, one of the things we want to do is tune to our legacy leadership discussion, right? And we're going to start that off with a couple of quotes, but I'm getting ahead of myself. First thing that we have to do is we have to go ahead and get through our rules for the podcast. So, a couple of things for you all. Number one rule is to get connected. So, there's a number of ways that you can connect with us over here at Legacy Leadership Consulting and the Legacy Leaders family. First of all, you can go to hashtag Legacy Leaders on Facebook and you can join the group. There's extra videos, all of our legacy leadership moments, our legacy leadership discussions, and a number of tools that I've put into the group. Also, if you're interested in getting a copy of my book, Why Can't People Just Do Their Jobs? The Empowering Leader's Guide to Having More Fulfillment, Less Stress, and Getting the Best Out of Your team, no matter who you lead. You can get that. You can get information about how to get a free copy of that in the group as well. And if you stick around to the end of the podcast, I'll also be giving you all a little bit of information about how to do that here at the end of the podcast. So the next thing you want to do is make sure that you go ahead and set Facebook to notify you whenever there is whenever we go on live, so that you don't miss any episodes. The second thing that you want to do is go ahead and spread the wealth. We would love it if you all would go ahead and share us. If you're on right now, if you're watching in replay and you feel like this is something that somebody that you know can benefit from, go ahead and share them. Tag your friends in the link. Share the episode so that everybody's is aware of what's going on. And then the third rule, which is kind of our most important rule, is that we are cultivating an environment of respect. We're cultivating an environment where it's okay. What's going on, Gibbs? How you doing? We're cultivating an environment where it's okay for people to make mistakes, but it's not okay for us to be disrespectful of people's persons. The basic idea is you cannot like what I say. You cannot like me. You cannot like my guests when we have guests on or the topic, but please make sure that in your comments you are respectful and respecting each other's opinions. That's the biggest thing, making sure that we can agree to disagree if necessary, but we can at all times disagree agreeably. All right. So with that said, I want to go ahead and let you all know again the mission, the goal of this podcast and of Legacy Leadership Consulting in general is to help leaders cultivate environments that facilitate the manifestation of their team's greatness and create systems to sustain that transformation. So again, we can create leaders that create other leaders. And in doing so, we can change the world one legacy at a time. So if you like more information about our organization or how we can help you to transform your business or your organization's leadership culture, then please go ahead and see us at www.legacyleadershipmastery.com. Again, that's www.legacyleadershipmastery.com. All right, so let's pause for just a second. For those of you all who are out there and are watching and you can hear me, go ahead and give us some thumbs up or some hearts. Give us some love. Let us know that you're out there. Even if you're watching it on the replay, let us know where you're watching from and what business you're in or what organization, what leadership role you may have. All right. And so I want to go on to our next segment now, which is our legacy leadership discussion. So for our legacy leadership discussion, what we're going to do is we're going to start off, and this is kind of something that we're testing out, trying out. I want you to let me know what you think about it. We're going to start off each legacy leadership discussion with a couple of quotes that are that kind of stand out and kind of capture the essence of what we're talking about with the discussion. So for today, we've got 2 quotes from presidents, since we just had President's Day yesterday. And so the first is a quote from former President John Quincy Adams, and it says, "If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader." So again, if your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, then you are a leader. And that's from former President John Quincy Adams. And the second quote for today is from President John F. Kennedy, right, who said, "Ask not," no, I'm just kidding, that's not the quote that we're doing for today. He said, "Leadership and learning are indispensable to each other." Leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. And those 2 quotes really kind of cap off what we're gonna be talking about today in our leadership, our legacy leadership discussion. Because what I wanted to talk about, and if you saw our legacy leadership moment from Monday, you saw that we were talking about step 5 of the empower process, the watch and learn step. And this is really the quintessential essence of what we do as leaders, these 2 things, right? These 2 quotes. The first thing is that our actions, our visions, our communication, how we lead and who we are supposed to inspire our team, right? To dream more, to learn more, to do more, and to become more. But the key to our leadership, right? So we gain the title of leadership by the inspiration that we give to people, by the fact that we can see the vision, we can cast the vision, we can make it plain, we can get people galvanized around it. But here's the key to us maintaining our leadership and us being able to help others to manifest that vision, and it's that second quote: leadership and learning are indispensable to each other. And that's the reason why step 5 is called watch and learn, right? When we're supervising the teams that we lead, when we're supervising the people that we lead, it's incredibly necessary that we understand that part of what we do is that we learn from them. We learn from what's going on in their world. We learn from how they are executing on the things that we're asking them to do. We learn from the things that they get, the things that they don't get, the struggles that they have, the way that they see the project or the task that we've given them. We learn from their mistakes, right? And as President Kennedy said, leadership and learning are indispensable to one another, because part of the key of what we do, right, as leaders, is to help people understand and bridge that gap between their mistakes and their resurgence, right? They're falling down and they're getting back up again. And so part of what we want to focus on is, what are you learning from your team, and how is it helping you to better facilitate their transformation? How is it helping you to better facilitate their manifestation process, the coming out of their greatness? So when we're going through, there's a couple of things that we talked about in the watch and learn session, and I want to focus on the first 2 in this discussion. We talked a lot about kind of looking at catastrophic failures and looking at inspecting what you expect and where you put your focus in the Monday legacy leadership moment. But I really want to focus on trusting your people and building a process that you can trust. So first step, again, we talked about was trusting your people. It's tremendously important that you trust the greatness that is within your people. Part of the reason that you are able to be a leader, part of the reason that you are able to help your leadership teams, is because you can see something in them that oftentimes they may not even be able to see, right? We get to a leadership role, a leadership position, because generally we've overcome obstacles that others may not have overcome. We've done things that others may not have been able to do, and we've done it well. We've excelled. Now here's the key. You're on the other side of the hard thing, right? When you're in a leadership position, generally you're on the other side of having done the hard thing. For a lot of the people that you lead, they're on the on the far side of the chasm, trying to figure out how you made it over. And it always reminds me of the scene in The Matrix when they're going through, when Neo and Morpheus are going through the jump sequence, right? And everybody's sitting there, and Morpheus goes and he explains to Neo, how to make it happen and do it. And he goes and he jumps across the building, and it's like, poof, easy, done. And Neo looks at it, and he can't quite get it, but he goes and he tries anyway, and of course he falls flat on his face, right? Oftentimes when we get across, we forget what it was like when we were learning how to do it. And the power that you have as a leader is to work with your people through that period, through that time frame, right? Through that time when they don't believe in themselves, when they don't really when they're barely able to believe that it's possible. And what you do is you learn from how they process that to help them to get to the other side, right? Some people are scared of different things, right? And so you may not have had to deal with the fear that they are dealing with. But by understanding what those fears are, you can then move them forward, right? When I used to, as many of you know, I'm also, in addition to doing leadership consulting, one of the businesses that I ran before I started this business, how we doing this, our major? One of the things that I did before I started this business, I ran a jiu-jitsu school down in Camp Lejeune, and I used to teach women's self-defense, I used to teach adult self-defense and children's self-defense. And one of the interesting things about that experience was, depending on who I was teaching, learning to defend themselves held different triggers for certain people. For certain people, they were claustrophobic. For certain people, they had some issues, right? Some of the women that I taught women's self-defense who had been in domestic violence situations or had been in sexual assault situations. And so there were different triggers that everybody had. And part of my job was to do and to teach the basics to everybody. But another part of my job, one of the important pieces about me getting them from not being able to defend themselves to being able to defend themselves, was recognizing where the places were that they would get stuck. And it was different for everybody. Some people didn't like being in enclosed spaces or being on the bottom, and so they would go, and if someone was on top of them, right, they would, everything that they knew to do would go out of their head because they just couldn't get comfortable. And so for some of them, we wouldn't even go through the full move. We would just get them comfortable in that space, knowing that they're safe, knowing that everything is okay, so that they could get past that, so that then they could get to the other side. So in this legacy leadership discussion, I went a little bit long today, but I wanted you to be clear on the fact that learning is part of your leadership, just as President Kennedy said. And many of you out there have tremendously inspirational visions for the world. For your companies that you run, you got into business because you wanted to do something. You wanted to take care of customers. You want to take care of people. You saw a better way, a faster way, a more effective or a more efficient way to do something, and you put it out there to the marketplace, and you have something beautiful to give to the world. Just remember that the second part of your leadership is that you're also always learning. We are never finished learning as leaders, because we're constantly learning what the people that we lead need for us to know to help them to get to the other side. So that's our legacy leadership discussion for today. And now we're going to move on to our next segment. We're going to talk about some leadership transformations. All right. And we'll be back in just a second. While we're doing this, let me go ahead and make sure that I follow rule number 2 and share this out to some of our groups so that everybody can get in, because I know that Facebook changes the algorithm all the time. So we want to make sure that we go ahead and get it to as many people as we can. So let me do that right now. All right. So there we go. All right. So now we're back. What we're going to be talking about today is just giving you a little bit of insight into kind of my leadership journey, my leadership transformation. And I wanted to talk to you about one of my leaders in my life that really kind of influenced me in an interesting way. And this is a story that I don't tell very often, but it was a tremendously impactful story from when I was in high school, right? So as many of you all know, my father was a very big influence in my life as far as leadership, and the way that he taught me growing up as a kid. One of the things that he talked a lot about was and it really stuck with me, was the fact that he was not training me as a teenager to rely on him for decision-making guidance. He was training me as a teenager to be able to think the way that he thought through decisions, and to deal with the consequences of those decisions, and to basically be an adult decision maker. That was his goal, and so he put me in situations oftentimes to kind of create that. Another leader that I had, and this was one of my teachers in high school, was a teacher that I had actually for 2 years. He was my advanced math teacher, so he taught trigonometry and analytical geometry, and then he taught calculus my senior year, right? And it was Mr. Hutchison was his name. And what was amazing about Mr. Hutchison, and what stood out to me, is that Mr. Hutchison was the type of leader and the type of teacher that would not accept less than your best. He wouldn't accept less than you were capable of. And it was interesting because it actually took me a little bit of time. It took me till my second year to really understand what he was about, because he was one of those leaders that he has a kind of gruff exterior. He wasn't kind of the warm and fuzzy or anything like that. It was very difficult to get to develop a relationship with him. And I think that one of the things that wound up happening was, because I had him in my junior year, and I passed this class, and I stayed on. How we doing, Jacqueline? How you doing? And I stayed on with him. One of the interesting things about what he did is I could see that perseverance, that I went on to calculus and I wanted to continue trying hard. That perseverance made him warm a little bit to me. But even when he was cooler and not necessarily kind of reaching out as much, one of the things that I could see and that I could sense from him was the fact that he didn't tolerate the normal excuses that people would let me get away with, right? I was that kid. I was 16 years old my senior year. I graduated high school a year early, year or 2 years early, depending on how you count it. And a lot of people would kind of give me a free pass, and not in a pejorative way or not in a negative way, but it was just, they didn't hold my feet to the fire the way that he did. And some people just kind of silently decided that they would let me do less than my best. But Mr. Hutchison was one of those teachers that was really, it was really important to him that he pushed me and that he made me do what he thought I was capable of. And of course, as any, especially my junior year, as any 15-year-old student would, I felt like he was just being mean and he was just picking on me and I couldn't stand his class, all those different types of things. But I kept going and I kept working and I kept trying because my parents weren't having none of that. So I was gonna have to go to school. I was gonna have to do what I was supposed to do. So it was a little bit of personal motivation, but there was a whole bunch of at-home motivation, if you know what I mean. And so as I went and I made the transition to my senior year, Mr. Hutchison did something with his calculus class that I thought was phenomenal, and it really showed me kind of the power of group dynamics, in that he treated us as a class like we weren't just individuals learning this lesson. He made us work together in groups a lot more. He made us figure out things together. He put groups against each other. He created games so that we would compete. He did things, but what was most interesting in how he set up the room during that second year was, we weren't allowed as students to kind of silo ourselves and be individual, whether you were at the top or whether you were at the bottom, right? He graded his tests on a curve, and the curve was always set by the top score and then going down. He encouraged us during class to work on problems together and to try to figure the stuff out together. And what was interesting was, when we got to the calculus class, when we got to that level, there were a number of the rules that existed in the kind of earlier classes that didn't exist anymore. They weren't necessary because he had developed a culture, because he had taught all of us for our analytical geometry and our trigonometry classes. So he had already developed a culture that allowed him to be freer. And what I saw was, when you can have that culture, when you have that established, it actually allows you to engage more with your people. It allows you to pour more into them and to give more of yourself to them. And as leaders, oftentimes we struggle with how to develop that culture quickly. And so kind of the aha moment that I got from Mr. Hutchison was that he was the type of leader that I knew cared, and he was kind of my prototype for those leaders that care but are not necessarily well skilled at breaking that ice, at getting through to create that culture quickly. Like I said, it took an entire year for us to kind of break through that and for him to get that culture established. And so one of the things that I took from him when I was a teacher, when I taught, and I taught Spanish, for those of you all that don't know, one of the things that I would do is it was really important to me to establish that culture quickly. And again, for those of you all that are just tuning in or that are watching on the replays, the Legacy Leadership Podcast, where we're changing the world one legacy at a time. I'm talking to you a little bit about my teacher, Mr. Hutchison, and how I learned from him a couple of different things about leadership. But one of the main things was how culture and establishing your culture in your organization is actually, it gives you more freedom to operate and gives you more freedom to truly lead. And so culture is one of the quintessential important things that you have to establish at the front end of what you do. So like I was saying, when I became a teacher, one of the things that was really important to me was to establish culture from day one, to make sure that my students were coming into my classroom and were understanding who they were going to be in that space with me, rather than kind of trying to feel it out or wait about it or leave it to them to determine whether or not they were going to conform. One of the interesting things about my classroom, and I did this when I was a Marine Corps commander as well, there's certain things that you can do that are nonverbal cues, right, that get people to conform to what is the expectation. They get people to live up to the culture, and they get people to feel like they're already, the expectation is that they're going to be part of the culture, right? And that actually makes them feel like they're part of a team. And this is one of the things that we actually became part of a team at the end of my time with Mr. Hutchison. But I remember the distinction between the 2 years. In the first year, you didn't feel like you were on that team. It felt like it was almost not a tryout, but it definitely felt like it was something where you weren't sure if you were on the team. And part of what I took from that experience, and kind of my experience as a student and in subsequent experiences going forward, is you definitely have to have a rite of passage. You definitely have to have a point where people earn their space on the team. But how you create that is extremely important. And I finally really got to understand that as I went through officer candidate school and as I became a Marine Corps officer, right? One of the things that you see, and one of the things that makes the Marine Corps such a dynamic and phenomenal organization, is that every Marine goes through a similar type of training, and every Marine earns the title Marine. There's a ceremony that we all have, whether you're in boot camp, whether you're at OCS, whether you're on the West Coast or the East Coast. You go through and you do everything that you need to do to get to this point, and once you get to this point, you have earned and we have what's called an Eagle, Globe, and Anchor ceremony. You've earned your title of United States Marine. And that experience is something that confers a feeling that I can't even, there aren't words to describe what it means to be part of that fraternity, that brotherhood, that family, right? But it comes after having worked for it, having earned it. But one of the things that I always looked at is, Officer Candidate School is a 10-week program. You're 77 days in the training and kind of being inculcated into the organization. How can you do something like that with your companies? How can you do something like that with your organizations? If you're running a nonprofit or you're running a small business, how can you do something like that but get that experience in faster time? And what I talk to leaders about so much is, first of all, you have to be clear on what your core values are, right? And then second of all, when you're hiring, it's really important that you figure out what are the necessary job descriptions. So the first step, again, core values. Who are you? Who are you as a company? Who are you as an organization? Who are you as a leader, right? And a lot of times I've heard it also discussed, and we do a vision exercise, and I've heard it talked about as a vision story as well. We do that with some of our clients to really tell the story of who your company is. When somebody's coming to join you all, they're not just coming to do a job. They're joining an organization. And what does it mean to be part of that team? What are the necessary requirements? What are necessary character requirements? What are necessary skill requirements to be part of that organization? What are the, and those are your gotta haves. That's what I call them, right? Then you got your second, your want to haves. What are those? Are you clear on those? Are you looking for those when you're interviewing people? And then thirdly, what are your can't haves? What are the deal breakers? What are the things that don't comport with who your team is and make it so that people shouldn't join your team because they're not going to be happy there? Are you aware of those things? If you can be aware of those three things, then you can steer your people in a way to do their job to thrive in your company, to do a good job. That was the thing that I did with my students. I had my 3 rules, right? And well, I had 4 technically. One was just a fun rule. The first one was do your best. The second one was respect yourself. Third one was respect others, right? If you could do those 3 things, you could be successful in my class. And the fourth one was don't act a fool. But again, like I said, that was largely just to have fun with. But in my classroom, I set up a scenario where respect was the value. You could be right, you could be wrong, you could make mistakes. Everything was okay. But if you were disrespectful of yourself or of others, then we had problems because you were part of this family and we had to treat each other like that family. We could have disagreements, we could have arguments. However, we would not be disrespectful to one another. So in looking at, my leadership transformation with Mr. Hutchison and going from not being on the team to being on the team and understanding the growth in our relationship. He was an excellent teacher, right? He taught us, and I want to say the majority of our class passed the AP test. I'm not sure exactly how. I believe almost all of us passed the AP test. And so he did a great job preparing us. And I wonder how many more students would take his class, how many more students would be part of that tribe if that first year he had done a different job of kind of connecting, right? It was basically one of those things where those of us who persevered or knew that we were going to calculus regardless, like my mother was just going to make me do calculus, so it wasn't even a question. We were the people that continued on. But I wonder how many more people would have been able to make it through that course, because he was a phenomenal teacher. And I wonder how many of you all out there, how many leaders out there lose some of your people because they don't get to know you early enough, because you don't get to establish your culture early enough. And by the time they get to get some face time with you, or they get to get some exposure to what the culture really is, they've already become disillusioned or felt like they don't fit in. So that's the question I want to leave you with for today. I really appreciate you all tuning in and spending some time with us this Tuesday evening on the Legacy Leadership Podcast. Again, I want you all to, as you're going out and kind of going through this week, I want you to think about those quotes. I want you to think about the discussion that we had today. How are you learning from your people? How are they impacting your leadership? How are they changing the way that you do what you do? And what is it that you are gaining kind of from the experience of watching them? What are you learning about yourself? What are you learning about your triggers? What are you learning about other places where you can get better at communicating or at clarifying your vision or at concentrating their efforts towards your vision? So, as we always talk about at the end of the show, if you are interested in getting a free copy of my book, Why Can't People Just Do Their Jobs? The Empowering Leader's Guide to Having More Fulfillment, Less Stress, and Getting the Best Out of Those You Lead. Remember, step 1 is to share the podcast, and then send me a message telling me one of the quotes that we have for the podcast, and then we can make that happen for you. I'll get my team to get you a free copy of the ebook over, and then we just need your email so we can know where to send it. So, with that said, remember, as we close, that leadership is about casting a vision and facilitating the manifestation of greatness in others. Remember that everybody has greatness within them, that everybody is on this planet for a reason, that everybody was created to bring something special to the world, and that we as leaders have the privilege of being part of that process. We have the privilege of helping other people to manifest their greatness, to show their greatness to the world. And by doing so, by facilitating that process, we're able to make the world better, one legacy at a time. So, till next time, have a great evening, and remember to live every day like it's on purpose. Have a great one.